Today's guest is Julia Scher, Professor of Surveillance Architecture at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne. We approach the tech landscape from an embodied perspective. What happens to the body when the self is digitized? How are we reckoning with the infiltrative internet of today? How do we continue to empathize and connect with one another? Professor Scher revels in these questions, opting for tech seduction in lieu of tech pessimism. She draws a genealogy of tech from the endlessness of Californian life, the infinite highway, and the never-ending hamburgers. And she relishes the soft-rounded corners of our safe contemporary devices.
Octopus.
Professor Julia Scher, Professor of Surveillance Architectures at the KHM. The loose question which frames this kind of series of conversations is what it means to be an individual in a networked world. But what I think this conversation opens up is the extent to which we can shape and change the technologies within which we exist. What do you think the role of artists is to navigate all kind of change or reframe or reimagine these very pressing, real social and political and environmental concerns?
I gave a lecture recently in which the title, one of the lines was maybe the human thing's over. A humanness, this word is connected to it as individual. And maybe these states are changing before our eyes. Some things we're resistant to, like the problems with Facebook in a networked world, and some things we're into, like you can watch your heartbeat as you're running. So the presence of trying, what we're trying, is often in young students' artworks, which is admirable. Desperately to be in the moment is something human, right? You want to be with your lover, your family, the meal you're eating, the warm home, not in war. This wonderful kind of importance of the moment for the human. Maybe we don't need those the same way in a networked world. So these are great questions. Some people are dealing with individualism by really feeling their safety and wanting to reach out. For example, a student the other day wanted to enter the criminalized world, to touch, to feel, because in a sense, it's about a feeling state, to get a feeling. And what will that lead to in art? What will that mean to data collection or people with trans identities or identifications in worlds that the network world is taking on? What will artists do? What will they portray? What will they be? And will they need to be human to make an artwork? Will they send out their AI to create a functionality? Or, in the case of one of my own works, will an artwork that somebody buys just be an algorithm? Or is the algorithm over now that networks have advanced way beyond the appearance of the algorithm to art? But we still are in or stuck with or surrounded by our humanness and our need for empathy for each other.
One thing you mentioned is sort of these multiplication and proliferation and diversification of identity discourses, which seems to have gone hand in hand with the advent of the internet, or certainly the iteration of the internet that we have at the moment. Humanism, the way we understand it from my perspective, is rooted in the sort of very much the Enlightenment ideals, lots of which I think aren't wrong, but they're Enlightenment ideals born of a specific historical political context.
Yes.
And geographic context. Is there a way that we can move towards a shared set of kind of values which include all these other narratives and all these other perspectives and geographies?
What is interesting about this period is how we follow commands. That is, we live right now in a kind of command culture. My cell phone, for example, it's not concocting commands, it's giving commands based on what? And these can give joy, pleasure, and trauma. When you watch that someone your political party you're not into is winning or getting followers, it provides trauma. And people have post-traumatic stress disorder from trauma on the internet. Well, this is a new great place for artists to work. I don't know if it's bringing people together, but something better. How to bring people together, though, when the field of view is only the internet, only the cell phone, or only a book. What happens to the body? Is it the disembodied self that becomes then the arbitrator and present personality in a road to consciousness, or a vote, or a movement against arms, or movement against immigrants? What shows up on the internet is the will of groups. I get pictures every day. I don't know about you, this or that group, which is purporting itself to be in the right. So I see so many views of the righteous, and they're all different groups from everywhere. Well, that works to bring people together, but in ways that we still don't know a heck of a lot about. What happens when the virtual body, the perspectives, are no longer with lungs breathing, but something else? The internet, or the net, is by its nature, at least till now, is an infiltrative system. You accept it on your phone, or you sign up for money online. It takes information from you. It's infiltrative. How does that play out and work on the desire for infiltrative technologies, maybe to figure out where we are, how our bodies are? How will we accept that in terms of thoughts for political parties or nation states? Maybe these machines will be deciding factors. They already are. The multiple perspectives as gleaned on Instagram or Facebook or on Twitter. These are, if we had a discussion about the infiltrative capacity of all these systems, well, it would be endless, wouldn't it? I think by machine, which is non-human, but perhaps made by humans, that functions as an extra body or intra-body or observant technology that then renders its observations as political or economic fodder for other things.
I'm increasingly conscious of extreme anachronism in our contemporary world, which is ironic because in a world in which we're increasingly networked and have access at least to the same platforms and to the same media, if I travel geographically, I often have this feeling that I'm really moving through time. Maybe it's based on a false expectation that in a sort of a networked world, there was part of the early Californian ideology. Maybe there's really just a false expectation that because we can access this big shared repository of information, that we're going to somehow be more alike one another. That's proven not to be the case.
I would agree with you. Also, this heightened sense of insensitivity, which I talked about in the early 90s, has really, I believe, come to fore. It's in more non-feeling states than I ever imagined I would be in confrontations of war. Maybe it's this perhaps notion of time is a good way to express that it's not your time to get involved or react. That the machine describes for us, the network describes for us who and what and where we are. It kind of enters the early 2000s discussion of the uncanny over at Berkeley and what it meant to us to live in that or to vote in that. So they actually started something to reckon with this. They had an initiative that let voters on their cell phone, now it seems very old-fashioned, to talk about their participation in voting and who they were and would they give up information to describe their voting practices. It seems like things are going to get pretty rough in our disconnects. What can be done and what can you start with as a small thing to look at, in the case of artists, to look at or think about or share these moments. I haven't reckoned with it well. I know some people who have, and they've disappeared in many senses, or they've returned to just writing and not making art. In New York, there are plays. The theater is reckoning with it. There are authors, Sarah Schulman, others who continue to fight the battle. Dee Dee Halleck, who had to go to Supreme Court 2 months ago to present her case about distribution of free television in New York State. So there are those on the battlefront, on the front lines, seeing the amazing and cascading waterfalls of events that will happen if you don't stop the herding of people or the stopping of information, the opening up of information, the stopping of information. These battles are still to be waged.
We're kind of circling around the topic which you mentioned at the earlier, which is empathy and connecting with one another, and how that feeling is digitally mediated. My feeling is that in the interpersonal, as in when you sit down with one another, my personal experience is that I find it much easier to empathize with someone who I can read on many levels. Many of those levels I'm not conscious of, because as human beings we've evolved over tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, to read one another on various ways, not only via language, but via smell, via body language, etc., etc. Now, when you're communicating with a mediated version of someone, with an avatar, some lines of text or of code, it's difficult to read on so many levels. From what you're talking about, I mean, do you think that we're in a process now where we're trying to understand how we can use this technology in a more, not humanist, but perhaps a more human way?
First off, I think we're evolving. We're evolving to acceptieren things, and we're very flexible beings, and I think we will adapt to what we have brought upon us with technology. At the early time of the web, 1995, Marie Sabot, who started Word.com, said, this was before you could chat on the internet and stuff. And there were things called like the palace, where you could go with avatars, very, very early internet. She said, this new capacity takes us back to courtly love, where you had to write letters and they would get to somebody ages later. You didn't connect with the person. It was a piece of writing. And this was shocking to everyone, this wonderful realization she had. Another person early on who got this, I got to know him when he was at MIT, and his name is Steve Mann, and he walked with his webcam, the first of its kind, walked from MIT to Mass College of Art, the first surveillance class in the United States, and we saw his whole journey over Netscape. This was profound because in the end of his journey, we saw him. He came in live. We were all stunned. The separate or different manners of the live and the virtual became into sharp contrast. In terms of empathy, intimacy, Hiroshi Ishii at Media Lab, from very early on, he was working on how to get someone over their computer to feel you in another city or another country. And he had first worked with this little roll ball. Do you know this work? A little roll ball. So you could, with your own mouse, feel equivalent of a mouse, feel what the other person was feeling. This is 25, 30 years ago. So the notion of self needing to be in two places at once brought many, many people into the field. So many unanswered questions. And of course, we love artists. We love the unanswered question. We love the terrible spigot draining off life. We're drawn to things that hurt and inflame, and how can we repair?
I recently started reading a bit about and listening to a bit of Shoshana Zuboff.
Surveillance capitalism.
Exactly.
Yes.
And what really struck me was observation that this economy was based upon what used to be termed data exhaust by Google. So that's like the cached searches which they didn't think had any use, and then someone was like, actually this is extremely valuable information for generating behavioral models. What were some of the early discussions about surveillance? Was there already then foresight about what the kind of tension that would exist between privacy, surveillance, consumerism, freedom, information?
Yes. And a lot of it came from Germany. Many people in the film and television industry, closed circuit television was invented here in Deutschland, by the way. Nobody remembers that. But they came to California to work in the film and TV industry. And I grew up on television. The idea of taking everything, of recycling, like they called it data debris or leftovers. In California, no, you recycled everything from early on. If you had an old TV show that didn't work on the network, it would go somewhere else. So this endlessness, this recirculation, this idea of the closed circuit where images are recycling and rotating endlessly, that after one TV show, there would be another television show and yet another and another and another. But this endlessness was a big part of a California experience also, that if you had one hamburger, it wasn't enough. You had to have another one. Now, of my own friends who disappeared in the wild, they found many problems. It's very difficult, especially if you're a woman or a women couple, to go out to live off the grid.
Yeah. I mean, this is something which I'm personally really interested in, this desire for independence and autonomy. And living off the grid, it unites a very, very diverse political spectrum. And from, in Germany you have the Reichsbürger, like people on the right, to, to sort of the intentional community scene on the left.
I see these as hopeful movements because they bring options. They bring optimism, not death solutions, but life solutions. I find it very encouraging. And what drives a lot of people mad is they see what would be effective to be independent, but they can't do it. And it causes friction, internal friction.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. They're thought models. And I mean, we only have to say, like, just as we were saying earlier, like, these were, even the idea of living ecologically was a fringe hippie idea in the 70s. And now now people understand that this, in a finite system such as the Earth, which has a limited amount of resources, the only logical way to live is ecologically.
I would like to mention another case of people who do their forecasting thing and then retreat. In America, we've had people go to South America or Central America to live, hide, or to Baja, California, and just buy property and live on the beach. So it's a mixed bag of different personal stories. People have taken many moves in their lives after coming to a point where they see what the earth needs. So it's full of successes and failures.
I regularly indulge in the fantasy of getting my laptop and smashing it and walking off into a post-internet bliss. Is this ever something which you also dream about? I mean, what's your relationship with your digital world?
Well, this is an embarrassing answer, but anybody of my age who didn't grow up with this stuff can easily see it because we were there. So it doesn't bother me exactly the same way that it bothers you. But I'm enchanted by how, like, the cell phones, all the modern technology has round, soft edges, so it can't hurt you. So it's made that you want to exist with it. It, unless you like forced it down your throat, it can't really hurt you. So I'm intrigued by the innovations that are made to seduce, as well as compel, as well as make a network which is absolutely irresistible. It's interesting to see what will happen next. I think there'll be big leaps. And we don't know how to take control of all the things that happen because of leaps. But I think it will be interesting to see what happens. I'm looking forward to things that are coming because the way the earth unfolds, time seems to keep moving on. We can't stop it. And in spite of some people wanting to.
Then I think that's a very nice way to conclude our discussion, unless you have any concluding comments.
Thank you for having me to the KHM web super site for individual absorption, recognition, and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia Scher.